All right, are we live? Okay, here we go. Should be live right now. So, a couple of things has come to my attention. First of all, YouTube blocks um, any video um, that has copyrighted content in it, including live videos. Now, that is particularly sad because in some of my videos, some of my live streams, I paint while listening to great music, and YouTube just, you know, just blocks that video in all the territories, and in some cases, in some territories, meaning if you're in Colorado, you might be able to watch me paint while listening to John Bon Jovi, which I never listened to. Um, but somebody in Mozambique will not be able to watch me paint while listening to John Bon Jovi. That is a tragedy of the greatest proportion. Uh, I'm really, exaggerating, but I mean, it's not a tragedy. Who cares? But the point is that, I didn't really know about this thing. I thought maybe I could get away with it, if I don't include it in the actual video, but if I just play it out loud, YouTube will be fine with that. But here we are. YouTube is not fine with that. So that has to change over time, and I think I've learned the lesson. So anyway, so now that's not going to happen. I mean, I'm still going to listen to some music, but I'm just going to be careful about what kind of music it is. Next, I'm going to continue reading Plato's The Republic today. But first, did you guys know that Karl Popper, in his um, Open Society and Its Enemies, a 3-volume classic, contemporary classic, starts with classifying Plato as a fascist. Now, Karl Popper was a mentor and philosophy professor for, guess who, of all people? George Soros. But, I mean, yeah, here's the thing. I am not Karl Popper, obviously. I probably would not be able to debate Karl Popper on this matter of Plato being a fascist or not, but that's a giant claim. That is a giant claim. And so far as I know, he's the only person who's deemed Plato to be a fascist. You know, a wholesale claim, but some people want to make crazy claims like that. So, anyway, that's just something to think about while I read Plato's The Republic to you out loud. Here we go. Where did I leave? We're not reading Phaedrus again. Okay, here we go. I bookmarked it last time, so this time I'll be able just to read it to you. This is, if anyone's still following, I'm on line 350, section D, where it goes, therefore, a good and clever person doesn't want to outdo those like himself, but those who are unlike him and his opposite. So it seems. But a bad and ignorant person wants to outdo both his like and his opposite, apparently. Now, Thrasymachus, we found that an unjust person tries to outdo those like him and those unlike him. Didn't you say that? I did. And that a just person won't outdo like his like, but his unlike? Yes. Then a just person is like a clever and good one, and an unjust is like an ignorant and bad one. It looks that way. Moreover, we agree that each has the qualities of the one he resembles. Yes, we did. Then a just person has turned out to be good and clever, and an unjust one ignorant and bad. Thrasymachus agreed to all this, not easily as I'm telling it, but reluctantly, with toil, trouble, and since it was summer, a quantity of sweat that was a wonder to behold. And then I saw something I'd never seen before. Thrasmachus blushing. But in my case, after we'd agreed that justice is virtue and wisdom and that injustice is vice and ignorance, I said, all right, let's take that as established. But we also said that injustice is powerful. Or don't you remember that, Thrasmachus? I remember, but I'm not satisfied with what you are now saying. I could make a speech about it, but if I did, I know that you'd accuse me of engaging in oratory. So either allow me to speak, or if you want to ask questions, go ahead and I'll say, all right, and nod yes and no. No one does, as no one does to old wives' tales. Don't do that, contrary to your own opinion. I'll answer so as to please you, since you don't let me make a speech. What else do you want? Nothing, by God. But if that's what you're going to do, go ahead and do it. I'll ask my questions. Ask ahead. I'll ask what I asked before, so that we may proceed with our argument about justice and injustice in an orderly fashion. For surely it was claimed that injustice is stronger and more powerful than justice. But now, if justice is indeed wisdom and virtue, it will easily be shown to be stronger than injustice. Since injustice is ignorance, no one could now be ignorant of that. However, I don't want to state that the matter so unconditionally, Thrasmachus, but to look into it in some such way as this. Would you say that it is unjust for a city to try to enslave other cities unjustly and to hold them in subjugation when it has enslaved many of them? Of course, that's what the best city will specially do, the one that is most completely unjust. I understand that's your position, but the point I want to examine is this. Will the city that becomes stronger than another achieve this power without justice, or will it need the help of justice? If what you said a moment ago stands, injustice is cleverness or wisdom, it will need the help of justice. But if things are as I stated, it will need the help of injustice. I'm impressed, Thrasmachus, that you don't merely nod yes or no, but give very fine answers. That's because I'm trying to please you. You're doing well at it too. So please me some more by answering this question. Do you think that a city, an army, a band of robbers or thieves, or any other tribe with a common unjust purpose would be able to achieve it if they were unjust to each other? No, indeed. What if they weren't unjust to each other? Would they achieve more? Certainly. Injustice, Thrasmachus, causes civil war, hatred, and fighting among themselves, while justice brings friendship and a sense of common purpose. Isn't that so? Let it be so, in order not to disagree with you. You're still doing well on that front. So tell me this. If the effect of injustice is to produce hatred wherever it occurs, then whenever it arises, whether among free men or slaves, won't it cause them to hate one another, engage in civil war, and prevent them from achieving any common purpose? Certainly. What if it arises between two people? Won't they be at odds, hate each other, and be enemies to one another? And to just people? They will. Does injustice lose its power to cause dissension when it arises within a single individual, or will it preserve it intact? Let it preserve it intact. Apparently, then, injustice has the power first to make whatever it arises in, whether it is a city, family, an army, or anything else, incapable of achieving anything as a unit because of the civil wars and differences it creates. And second, it makes that unit an enemy in itself and to what is, in every way, its opposite, namely justice. Isn't that so? Certainly. And even in a single individual, it has, by its nature, the very same effect. First, it makes him incapable of achieving anything because he is in a state of civil war, and not one of mine. Second, it makes him his own enemy as well as the enemy of just people. Hasn't it that effect? Yes. And the gods too are just? Let it be so. So an unjust person is also an enemy of the gods, Thrasmachus, while a just person is their friend? Enjoy your banquet of words. Have no fear. I won't oppose you. That would make these people hate me. Come, Then complete the banquet for me by continuing to answer as you've been doing. You've shown that just people are cleverer and more capable of doing things, while unjust ones aren't even able to act together. For when we speak of a powerful achievement by unjust men acting together, what we say isn't altogether true. They would never have been able to keep their hands off each other if they were completely unjust. But clearly, there must have been some sort of justice in them that at least prevented them from doing injustice among themselves at the same time as they were doing it to others. And it was this that enabled them to achieve what they did. When they started doing unjust things, they were only halfway corrupted by their injustice. For those who are all bad and completely unjust are completely incapable of accomplishing anything. These are the things I understand to hold, not the ones you first maintained. We must now examine, as we proposed before, whether just people also live better and are happier than unjust ones. I think it's clear already that this is so, but we must look into it further, since the argument concerns no ordinary topic, but the way we ought to live. Go ahead and look. I will. Tell me, do you think there is such a thing as the function of a horse? I do. And would you define the function of a horse or if anything else as that which one can do only with it or best with it? I don't understand. Let me put it this way. Is it possible to see anything other than eyes? Certainly not. Or to hear with anything other than ears? No. Then we are right to say that seeing and hearing are the functions of eyes and ears. Of course. What about this? Could you use a dagger or a carving knife or lots of other things in pruning a vine? Of course. But wouldn't you do a finer job with pruning a knife okay. But wouldn't you do a finer job with a pruning knife designed for the purpose than with anything else? You would. Then shall we take pruning to be its function? Yes. Now, I think you'll understand what I was asking earlier when I asked whether the function of each thing is what it alone can do or what it does better than anything else. I understand, and I think that this is the function of each. All right. Does each thing to which a particular function is assigned also have a virtue? Let's go over the same ground again. We say that eyes have the same function. We say that eyes have some function. They do. So there is also a virtue of eyes? There is. And ears have a function? Yes. So there is also a virtue of ears? There is. And all other things are the same, aren't they? They are. And could eyes perform their function well if they lacked their peculiar virtue and had the vice instead? How could they? For don't you mean if they had blindness instead of sight, whatever their virtue is? For I'm not now asking about that, but about whether anything that has a function performs it well by means of its own peculiar virtue and badly by means of its vice. That's true, it does. So ears too, deprived of their own virtue, perform their function badly. That's right. And the same could be said about everything else. So it seems. Come then, and let's consider this. Is there some function of a soul that you couldn't perform with anything else? For example, taking care of things, ruling, deliberating, and the like? Is there anything other than a soul to which you could rightly assign these and say that they are its peculiar function? No, none of them. What of living? Isn't that a function of a soul? It certainly is. And don't we also say that there is a virtue of a soul? We do. Then, will a soul ever perform its function well, Thrasymachus, if it is deprived of its own peculiar virtue, or is that impossible? It is impossible. Doesn't it follow then that a bad soul rules and takes care of things badly and that a good soul does all these things well? It does. Now we agreed that justice is a soul's virtue and injustice its vice? We did. Then it follows that a just soul and a just man will live well and an unjust one badly? Apparently so, according to your argument. And surely anyone who lives well is blessed and happy, and anyone who doesn't is its opposite? Of course. Therefore, a just person is happy and an unjust one wretched. So be it. It profits no one to be wretched but to be happy. Of course. And so, Thrasymachus, injustice is never more profitable than justice. Let that be your banquet, Socrates, at the feast of Bendes, given by you, Thrasymachus, after you became gentle and ceased to give me rough treatment. Yet I haven't had a fine banquet, but that's my fault, not yours. I seem to have behaved like a glutton, snatching at every dish that passes and tasting it before properly savoring its predecessor. But before finding the answer to our first inquiry about what justice is, I let that go and turn to investigate further. No, I investigate whether it is a kind of vice and ignorance or a kind of wisdom and virtue. Then an argument came up about injustice, about being more profitable than justice, and I couldn't refrain from abandoning the previous one and following up on that. Hence, the result of the discussion, as far as I'm concerned, is that I know nothing. For when I don't know what justice is, I hardly know whether it is a kind of virtue or not. I'll hardly know whether it is a kind of virtue or not. Um, or whether a person who has it is happy or unhappy. It's actually a great line there. I'm going to mark that passage there. Also, right, that famous phrase of all I know is that I know nothing, that must come from here, right? Hence, the result of the discussion, as far as I'm concerned, is that I know nothing. For when I don't know what justice is, I'll hardly know whether it is a kind of virtue or not, or whether a person who has it is happy or unhappy. Wow, Plato is amazing. Taking a water break at this point. Book 2. That's right, we ended book 1, and now we're in book 2, and there are 10 books to get through, so why don't you all wear your seatbelts? And we'll get through this as fast as we can, but you should enjoy the ride. Book 2, line 357. When I said this, I thought I had done with the discussion, but it turned out to have been only a prelude. Glaucon showed his characteristic courage on this occasion too, and refused to accept Thrasymachus's abandonment of the argument. Socrates, he said, do you want to seem to have persuaded us that it is better in every way to be just than unjust, or do you want to truly convince us of this? I truly want to convince you. I said, if I can. Well, then, you certainly aren't doing what you want. Tell me, do you think there is a kind of good we welcome, not because we desire what comes from it, but because we welcome it for its own sake? Joy, for example, and all the harmless pleasures that have no results beyond the joy of having them. Certainly, I think there are such things. And is there a kind of good we like for its own sake and also for the sake of what comes from it? Knowing, for example, and seeing and being healthy? We welcome such things, I suppose, on both counts. Yes. And do you also see a third kind of good, such as physical training, medical treatment, when sick, medicine itself, and the other ways of making money? We choose that these are onerous but beneficial to us, and we wouldn't choose them for their own sakes, but for the sake of the rewards and other things that come from them. There is also this third kind, but where do you put justice? I myself put it among the finest goods, as something to be valued by anyone who is going to be blessed with happiness, both because of itself, but because both because of itself and because of what comes from it. That isn't most people's opinion. They'd say that justice belongs to the onerous kind and is to be practiced for the sake of the rewards and popularity that comes from a reputation for justice, but is to be avoided because of itself as something burdensome. I know that that's the general opinion. Thrasymachus faulted justice on these grounds a moment ago and praised injustice, but it seems that I'm a slow learner. I was about to say a show learner. Well, he does like shows, but he's a slow learner. Come then, and listen to me as well, and see whether you still have that problem. For I think that Thrasymachus gave up before he had to, charmed by you as if he were a snake. But I'm not yet satisfied by the argument on either side. I want to know what justice and injustice are and what power each itself has when it is by itself in the soul. I want to leave out of account their rewards and what comes from each of them. So if you agree, I'll renew the argument of Thrasymachus. First, I'll state what kind of thing people consider justice to be and what its origins are. Second, I'll argue that all who practice it do so unwillingly as something necessary, not as something good. Third, I'll argue that they have a good reason to act as they do, for the life of an unjust person is, they say, much better than that of a just one. It isn't Socrates, but I believe it isn't Socrates that I believe any of that myself. I'm perplexed indeed, and my ears are deafened, listening to Thrasymachus and countless others, but I've yet to hear anyone defend justice in the way I want, proving that it is better than injustice. I want to hear it praised by itself, and I think that I'm most likely to hear this from you. Therefore, I'm going to speak at length to hear you praising justice and denouncing injustice. But see whether you want me to do that or not. I want that most of all. Indeed, what subject could someone with any understanding enjoy discussing more often? Excellent. Then let's discuss the first subject I mentioned, what justice is and what its origins are. They say that to do injustice is naturally good, and to suffer injustice bad, but that the badness of suffering it is but the ba- okay, but that the badness of suffering it so far exceeds the goodness of doing it, that those who have done and suffering and suffered injustice tasted both, but who lack the power to do it and avoid suffering it, decide that it is profitable to come to an agreement with each other neither to do injustice nor to suffer it. As a result, they begin to make laws and covenants, and what the law commands they call lawful and just. This, they say, is the origin and essence of justice. It is intermediate between the best and the worst. The best is to do injustice without paying the penalty. The worst is to suffer it without being able to take revenge. Justice is a mean between these two extremes. People value it not as a good, but because they are too weak to do injustice with impunity. Someone who has the power to do this, however, and is a true man, wouldn't make an agreement with anyone not to do injustice in order not to suffer it. For him, that would be madness. This is the nature of justice, according to the argument Socrates, and these are its natural origins. Hmm. We can see most clearly that those who practice justice do it unwillingly and because they lack the power to do injustice. If in our thoughts we grant to a just and unjust person the freedom to do whatever they like, we can then follow both of them and see where their desires would lead, and we'll catch the just person red handed traveling the same road as the unjust. The reason for this is the desire to outdo others and get more and more. This is what anyone's nature naturally pursues as good, but nature is forced by law into the perversion of treating fairness with respect. The freedom I mentioned would be most easily realized if both people had the power they say, the ancestor of Gyges of Lydia possessed. The story goes that he was a shepherd in the service of the ruler of Lydia. There was a violent thunderstorm, and an earthquake broke open the ground and created a chasm at the place where he was tending his sheep. Seeing this, he was filled with amazement and went down into it. And there, in addition to many other wonders of which we're told, he saw a hollow bronze horse. There were window like openings in it, and peeping in, he saw a corpse which seemed to be more than human size, wearing nothing but a gold ring on its finger. He took the ring and came out of the chasm. He wore the ring at the usual monthly meeting that reported to the king on the state of the flocks. And as he was sitting among the others, he happened to turn the setting of the ring towards himself to the inside of his hand. When he did this, he became invisible to those sitting near him, and they went on talking as if he had gone. He wondered at this, and fingering the ring, he turned the setting outwards again and became invisible. This is just the plot of Lord of the Ring, I guess. So he experimented with the ring to test whether it indeed had this power, and it did. And if he turned the setting inward, he became invisible. If he turned it outward, he became visible again. When he realized this, he at once arranged to become one of the messengers sent to report to the king. And when he arrived there, he seduced the king's wife, attacked the king with her help, killed him, and took over the kingdom. Also, something that I was noticed is in the Lord of the Rings. Anyway, that's nice to know. Uh, let's suppose then that there were two such rings, one worn by a just and the other by an unjust person. Now, no one, it seems, would be so incorruptible that he would stay on the path of justice or stay away from other people's property, when he could take whatever he wanted from the marketplace with impunity, go into people's houses and have sex with anyone he wished, kill or release from prison anyone he wished, and do all the other things that would make him like a god among humans. Rather, his actions would be in no way different from those of an unjust person, and both would follow the same path. This, some would say, is a great proof that one is never just willingly, but only when compelled to be. No one believes justice to be a good when it is kept private, since wherever either person thinks he can do injustice with impunity, he does it. Indeed, every man believes that injustice is far more profitable to himself than justice, and any exponent of this argument will say he's right. For someone who didn't want to do injustice given this sort of opportunity, and who didn't touch other people's property, would be thought wretched and stupid by everyone aware of the situation, though of course they praise him in public deceiving each other for fear of suffering injustice. So much for my second topic. As for the choice between the lives we're discussing, we'll be able to make a correct judgment about that only if we separate the most just and the most unjust. Otherwise, we won't be able to do it. Here's the separation I have in mind. We'll subtract nothing from the injustice of an unjust person and nothing from the justice of a just one, but we'll take each to be complete in his own way of life. First, therefore, we must suppose that an unjust person will act as clever craftsmen do. A first-rate captain or doctor, for example, knows the difference between what his craft can and can't do. He attempts the first, but lets the second go by, and if he happens to slip, he can put things right. In the same way, an unjust person's successful attempts at injustice must remain undetected if he is to be fully unjust. Anyone who is caught should be thought inept, for the extreme of injustice is to be believed to be without being just. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. Let me read that again. Anyone who is caught should be thought inept, for the extreme of injustice is to be believed to be just without being just. Okay. And our completely unjust person must be given complete injustice. Nothing may be subtracted from it. We must allow that while doing the greatest injustice, he has nonetheless provided himself with the greatest reputation for justice. If he happens to make a slip, he must be able to put it right. If any of his unjust activities should be discovered, he must be able to speak persuasively or to use force. And if force is needed, he must have the help of courage and the strength and of the substantial wealth and friends with which he has provided himself. Having hypothesized such a person, let's now in our argument put beside him a just man who is simple and noble and who, as Aeschylus says, doesn't want to be believed to be good, but to be so. We must take away his reputation, for a reputation for justice would bring him honor and reward, so that it wouldn't be clear whether he is just for the sake of justice itself or for the sake of those honors and rewards. We must strip him of everything except justice and make his situation the opposite of an unjust person's. Though he does know injustice, he must have the greatest reputation for it, so that he can be tested as regards justice, unsoftened by his bad reputation and its effects. Let him stay like that, unchanged, until he dies, just, but all his life believed to be unjust. In this way, both will reach the extremes, the one of justice and the other of injustice, and we'll be able to judge and which of them is happier. Woo, Glaucon. I said how vigorously you've scoured each of the men for our competition, just as you would a pair of statues for an art competition. I do the best I can, he replied, since the two are as I've described. In any case, it shouldn't be difficult to complete the account of the kind of life that awaits each of them, but it must be done. And zooming in and out of the shot here. um, and if what I say sounds crude, Socrates, remember that it isn't. That it isn't I who speak, but those who praise injustice at the expense of justice. They'll say that a just person in such circumstances will be whipped, stretched on a rack, chained, blinded with fire, and at the end, when he has suffered every kind of evil, he'll be impaled, and will realize then that one shouldn't want to be just, but to be believed to be just. Indeed, Aeschylus' words are far more correctly applied to unjust people than to just ones. For the supporters of injustice will say that a really unjust person having a way of life based on the truth about things and not living in accordance with opinion doesn't want simply to be believed to be unjust, but actually to be so. Harvesting, okay, now here's a quotation from Aeschylus. Harvesting a deep furrow in his mind where wise counsels propagate. He rules the city because of his reputation for justice. He marries into any family he wishes. He gives his children in marriage to anyone he wishes. He has contracts and partnerships with anyone he wants, and besides benefiting himself in all these ways, he profits because he has no scruples about doing injustice. In any contest, public or private, he's the winner and outdoes his enemies. And by outdoing them, he becomes wealthy, benefiting his friends and harming his enemies. Whoa, that's a callback. He makes adequate sacrifices to the gods and sets up magnificent offering to them. He takes better care of the gods, therefore, and indeed of the human beings he's fond of, than a just person does. Hence, it's likely that the gods, in turn, will take better care of him than of a just person. That's what they say, Socrates, that gods and humans provide a better life for unjust people than for the just ones. When Glaucon had said this, I had it in mind to respond, but his brother Adeimantus intervened. You surely don't think that the position has been adequately stated. Why not? I said. The most important thing to say hasn't been said yet. Well, then, I replied, a man's brother must stand by him, as the saying goes. If Glaucon has omitted something, you must help him. Yet what he has said is close enough to throw me to the canvas and make me unable to come to the aid of justice. Nonsense, he said. Hear what more I have to say, for we should also fully explore the arguments that are opposed to the ones Glaucon gave, the ones that praise justice and find fault with injustice, so that what I take to be his intention may be clearer. When fathers speak to their sons, they say that one must be just, as do all the others who have charge of anyone. But they don't praise justice itself, only the high reputations it leads to and the consequences of being thought to be just, such as the public offices, marriages, and other things Glaucon listed. But they elaborate even further in the consequence of reputation. By bringing in the steam of the gods, they are able to talk about the abundant good things that they themselves and the noble Hesiod and Homer say that the gods gave to the pious for Hesiod. His, okay. Hesiod. Okay, I found this on the web for Hey Sierra. Check it out. I'm gonna Google this. Let's see. Hesiod. Hesiod. Okay. Or in Greek that would be Hesi Hasidos. Just going to go with Hasidos. For Hasidos says that the gods make the oak trees. And here's a quotation from Hesiodus. Bear acorns at the top and bees in the middle, and make fleecy sheep heavy laden with wool. For the just, again, now the quotation ends, right? For the just, and tells of many other good things akin to these. And Homer is similar. So here's a quotation from Homer. When a good king in his piety upholds justice, the black earth bears wheat and barley for him, and his trees are heavy with fruit. His sheep bear lambs unfailingly, and the sea yields up its fish. Musaeus and his son make the gods give the just more headstrong goods than those. In their stories, they lead the just to Hades, seat them on couches, provide them with a symposium of pious people, crown them with wreaths, and make them spend all their time drinking, as if they thought drunkenness was the finest wage of virtue. Others stretch even further the wages that virtue receives from the gods, for they say that someone who is pious and keeps his promises leaves his children's children and a whole race behind him. In these and other similar ways, they praise justice. They bury the impious and unjust in mud in Hades, force them to carry water in a sieve, bring them into bad repute while they are still alive, and all those penalties that Glaucon gave to the just person, they give to the unjust, but they have nothing else to say. This then is the way people praise justice and find fault with injustice. Besides this, Socrates considered another form of argument about justice and injustice employed both by private individuals and by poets. All go on repeating with one voice that justice and moderation are fine things, but hard and onerous, while licentiousness and injustice are sweet and easy to acquire and are shameful only in opinion and law. They add that unjust deeds are for the most part more profitable than just ones, and whether in public or private, they willingly honor vicious people who have wealth and other types of power and declare them to be happy, but they dishonor and disregard the weak and the poor, even though they agree that they are better than the others. But the most wonderful of all these arguments concern what they have to say about the gods and virtue. They say that the gods too assign misfortune and a bad life to many good people, and the opposite fate to their opposites. Begging priests and prophets frequent the doors of the rich and persuade them that they possess a God driven power founded on sacrifices and incantations. If the rich person or any of his ancestors has committed an injustice, they can fix it with pleasant rituals. Moreover, if he wishes to injure some enemy, then at little expense, he'll be able to harm just and unjust alike, for by means of spells and enchantments, they can persuade the gods to serve them, and the poets are brought forward as witnesses to all these accounts. Some harp on the ease of vice as follows. Here's a quotation. Vice in abundance is easy to get, the road is smooth and begins beside you, but the gods have put sweat between us and virtue, and a road that is long, rough, and steep. Others quote Homer to bear witness that the gods can be influenced by humans, since he said, here's a quotation from Homer. The gods themselves can be swayed by prayer, and with sacrifices and soothing promises, incense and libations. Human beings turn them from their purpose when someone has transgressed and sinned. And they present a noisy throng of books by Musaeus and Orpheus, offspring, as they say, of Selene and the Muses, in accordance with which they perform their rituals, and they persuade not only individuals but whole cities that the unjust deeds of the living or the dead can be absolved or purified through ritual sacrifices and pleasant games. These initiations, as they call them, free people from punishment hereafter, while a terrible fate awaits those who have not performed the rituals. Right? Ring a bell, anyone? The sacrificial lamb, so to speak, the idea of sacrifice, where that might come from. Sacrifice that might end all the suffering. Anyway, Continuing. When all such things about the attitudes of gods and humans to virtue and vice are so often repeated, Socrates, what effect do you suppose they have on the souls of young people? I mean, those who are clever and are able to flit from one of these sayings to another, so to speak, and gather from them an impression of what sort of person he should be and of how best to travel the road of life. He would surely ask himself Pindar's question: should I, by justice or by crooked deceit, scale this high wall and live my life garden secure? And he'll answer, the various sayings suggest that there is no advantage in my being just if I am not also thought just, while the troubles and penalties of being just are apparent. But they tell me that an unjust person who has secured for himself a reputation for justice lives the life of a god. Since then, opinion forcibly overcomes truth and controls happiness, as the wise men say. I must surely turn entirely to it. I should create a facade of illusory virtue around me to deceive those who come near, but keep behind it the greedy and crafty fox of the wise. Uh, okay. Archilochus. The footnote says that the Archilochus of Paros, circa 756 to 716 BC, was an iambic and elegiac poet who composed a famous fable about the fox and the hedgehog. And the fox and the hedgehog, it's a metaphor that has been employed by the famous philosopher Isaiah Berlin. But surely someone will object, it isn't easy for vice to remain always hidden, will reply that nothing great is easy. And in any case, if we are to be happy, we must follow the path indicated on these accounts. In these accounts, to remain undiscovered, we'll form secret societies and political clubs, and there are teachers of persuasion to make us clever in dealing with assemblies and law courts. Therefore, using persuasion in one place and force in another, we'll outdo others without paying a penalty. What about the gods? Surely we can't hide from them or use violent force against them. Well, if the gods don't exist or don't concern themselves with human affairs, why should we worry at all about hiding from them? If they do exist and do concern themselves with us, we've learned all we know about them from the laws and the poets who give their genealogies, nowhere else. But these are the very people who tell us that the gods can be persuaded and influenced by sacrifices, gentle prayers, and offerings. Hence, we should believe them on both matters or neither. If we believe them, we should be unjust and offer sacrifices from the fruits of our injustice. If we are just, our only gain is not to be punished by the gods, since we lose the profits of injustice. But if we are unjust, we get the profits of our crimes and transgressions, and afterwards persuade the gods by prayer and escape without punishment. But in Hades, won't we pay the penalty for crimes committed here, either ourselves or our children's children? My friend, the young man will say, as he does his calculation, mystery rites and the gods of absolution have great power. The greatest cities tell us this, as do those children of the gods who have become poets and prophets. Why then should we still choose justice over the greatest injustice? Many eminent authorities agree that if we practice such injustice with a false facade, we'll do well at the hands of gods and humans, living and dying as we've a mind to. So, given all that has been said, Socrates, how is it possible for anyone of any power, whether of mind, wealth, body, or birth, to be willing to honor justice and not laugh aloud when he hears it praised? Indeed, if anyone can show that what we've said is false and has adequate knowledge that justice is best, he'll surely be full not of anger but of forgiveness for the unjust. He knows that apart from someone of godlike character who is disgusted by injustice, or one who has gained knowledge and avoids injustice for that reason, no one is just willingly. Through cowardice or old age or some other weakness, people do indeed object to injustice. But it's obvious that they do so only because they lack the power to do injustice, for the first of them to acquire it is the first to do as much injustice as he can. And all of this has no other cause than the one that led Glaucon and me to say to you, Socrates, of all of you who claim to praise justice, from the original heroes of old, whose words survive, to the men of the present day, not one has ever blamed injustice or praised justice except by mentioning the reputations, honors, and rewards that are their consequences. No one has ever adequately described what each itself does of its own power by its presence in the soul of the person who possesses it, even if it remains hidden from gods and humans. No one, whether in poetry or in private conversations, has adequately argued that injustice is the worst thing a soul can have in it, and that justice is the greatest good. If you had treated the subject in this way and persuaded us from youth, we wouldn't now be guarding against one another's injustices, but each would be his own best guardian, afraid that by doing injustice, he'd be living with the worst thing possible. Thrasymachus or anyone else might say what we've said, Socrates, or maybe even more, in discussing justice and injustice, crudely inverting their powers, in my opinion, and frankly, it's because I want to hear the opposite from you that I speak with all the force I can muster. So don't merely give us a theoretical argument that justice is stronger than injustice, but tell us what each itself does because of its own powers to someone who possesses it that makes just injustice bad and justice good. Follow Glaucon's advice and don't take reputations into account. For if you don't deprive justice and injustice of their true reputations and attach false ones to them, we'll say that you are not praising them, but their reputations, and that you're encouraging us to be unjust in secret. In that case, we'll say that you agree with Thrasymachus that justice is the good of another, the advantage of the stronger, while injustice is one's own advantage and profit, though not the advantage of the weaker. You agree that justice is one of the greatest goods, the ones that are worth getting for the sake of what comes from them, but much more, but much more so for their own sake, such as seeing, hearing, knowing, being healthy, and all other goods that are fruitful by their own nature, and not simply because of reputation. Therefore, praise justice as a good of that kind, explaining how, because of its very self, it benefits its possessors and how injustice harms them, leaving wages and reputations for others to praise. Others would satisfy me if they praised justice and blamed injustice in that way, extolling the wages of one and denigrating those of the other. But you, unless you order me to be satisfied, wouldn't, for you spent your whole life investigating this and nothing else, don't then give us only a theoretical argument that justice is stronger than injustice, but show what effect each has because of itself on the person who has it, the one for good and the other for bad, whether it remains hidden from gods and human beings or not. While I'd always admired the natures of Glaucon and Adeimantus, I was especially pleased on this occasion, and I said, "You're the sons of a great man." And Glaucon's lover began his elegy well when he wrote, celebrating your achievements at the Battle of Megara. Sons of Ariston, godlike offspring of a famous man. That's well said, in my opinion, for you must indeed be affected by the divine if you're not convinced that injustice is better than justice, and yet can speak on its behalf as you have done. And I believe that you really are unconvinced by your own words. I infer this from the way you live, for if I had only your words to go on, I wouldn't trust you. The more I trust you, however, the more I'm at a loss as to what to do. I don't see how I can be of help. Indeed, I believe I'm incapable of it, and here's my evidence. I thought what I said to Thrasymachus showed that justice is better than injustice, but you won't accept it from me. On the other hand, I don't see how I can refuse my help, for I fear that it may even be impious to have breath in one's body and the ability to speak, and yet to stand idly by and not defend justice when it is being prosecuted. So the best course is to give justice any assistance I can. Glaucon and the others beg me not to abandon the argument, but to help in every way to track down what justice and injustice are and what the truth about their benefits is. So I told them what I had in mind. The investigation we are undertaking is not an easy one, but requires keen eyesight. Therefore, since we aren't clever people, we should adopt the method of investigation that we'd use if lacking keen eyesight. We were told to read small letters from a distance and then noticed that the same letters existed elsewhere in a larger size and on a larger surface. We'd consider it a godsend, I think, to be allowed to read the larger ones first and then to examine the smaller ones to see whether they really are the same. Another water break at this point. That's certainly true, said Adamantus, but how is this case similar to our investigation of justice? I'll tell you. We say, don't we, that there is the justice of a single man and also the justice of a whole city? This is a beautiful section. Certainly, and a city is larger than a single man. It is larger. Perhaps then there is more justice in the larger thing, and it will be easier to learn what it is. So if you're willing, let's first find out what sort of thing justice is in a city, and afterward look for it in the individual, observing the ways in which the smaller is similar to the larger. That seems fine to me. Actually, last night I was dreaming about this for some reason. No, seriously, I was dreaming about this. I was sitting next to someone and he was making this point and looking at the tutor and going like, did I make enough points? And I was like, what? Of course you've made enough points. Yeah, I was dreaming about this in a way. If we could watch a city coming to be in theory, wouldn't we also see its justice coming to be and its injustice as well? Probably so. And when that process is completed, we can hope to find what we are looking for more easily. Of course, do you think we should try to carry it out then? It's no small task, in my view. So think it over. We have already said Adamantus. Don't even consider doing anything else. I think a city comes to be because none of us is self sufficient, but we all need many things. Do you think that a city is founded on any other principle? No. And because people need things, and because one person calls on a second out of one need and on a third out of a different need, many people gather in a single place to live together as partners and helpers. And such a settlement is called a city. Isn't that so? It is. And if they share things with one another, giving and taking, they do so because each believes that this is better for himself. That's right. Come then, let's create a city in theory from its beginnings, and it's our needs, it seems, that will create it. It is indeed. Surely our first and greatest need is to provide food to sustain life. Certainly. Our second is for shelter, and our third for clothes and such. That's right. How then will a city be able to provide all this? Won't one person have to be a farmer, another a builder, another a weaver, and shouldn't we add a cobbler and someone else to provide a medical care? All right. So the essential minimum for a city is 4 or 5 men? Apparently. And what about this? Must each of them contribute his own work for the common use of all? For example, will a farmer provide food for everyone, spending quadruple the time and labor to provide food to be shared by them all? Or will he not bother about that, producing 1/4 of the food in 1/4 the time and spending the other 3/4, one in building a house, one in production of clothes, and one in making shoes, not troubling to associate with the others, but minding his own business on his own? Perhaps, Socrates, Adamantus replied, the way you suggested first would be easier than the other. That certainly wouldn't be surprising, for even as you were speaking, it occurred to me that in the first place, we aren't all born alike, but each of us differs somewhat in nature from the others, one being suited to one task, another to another. Or don't you think so? I do. Second, does one person do a better job if he practices many crafts, or since he's one person himself, if he practices one? If he practices one. It is clear at any rate, I think, that if one misses the right moment in anything, the work is spoiled. It is. That's because the thing to be done won't wait on the leisure of the doer, but the doer must of necessity pay close attention to his work rather than treating it as a secondary occupation. Yes, he does. The result then is that more plentiful and better quality goods are more easily produced if each person does one thing for which he is naturally suited, does it at the right time, and is released from having to do any of the others. Absolutely. Then, Adamantus, we're going to need more than four citizens to provide the things we've mentioned, for a farmer won't make his own plow, nor if it is to be a good one, nor not if it is to be a good one, nor his hoe, or nor any of his other farming tools. Neither will a builder, and he too needs a lot of things, and the same is true of a weaver and a cobbler, isn't it? It is. Hence, carpenters, metalworkers, and many other craftsmen of that sort will share our little city and make it bigger. That's right. Yet it won't be a huge settlement even if we add cowherds, shepherds, and other herdsmen in order that the farmers have cows to do their plowing. The builders have oxen to share with the farmers in hauling their materials, and the weavers and cobblers have hides and fleeces to use. It won't be a small one either if it has to hold all those. Moreover, it's almost impossible to establish a city in a place where nothing has to be imported. Indeed it is. So we'll need yet further people to import from other cities whatever is needed. Yes, and if an importer goes empty handed to another city without a cargo of the things needed by a city from which he is to bring what his own city needs, he'll come away empty handed, won't he? So it seems. Therefore, our citizens must not only produce enough for themselves at home, but also goods for the right quality and quantity to satisfy the requirements of others. They must. So we'll need more farmers and other craftsmen in our city. Yes. And others to take care of the imports and exports. And they're called merchants, aren't they? Yes. So we'll need merchants too, certainly. And if the trade is by sea, we'll need a good many others who know how to sail. A good many indeed. And how will those in the city itself share the things that each produces? It was for the sake of this that we made their partnership and founded their city. Clearly, they must do it by buying and selling. Then we'll need a marketplace and a currency for such exchange. Certainly, if a farmer or any other craftsman brings some of his products to market, and he doesn't arrive at the same time as those who want to exchange things with him, is he to sit idly in the marketplace away from his own work? Not at all. There will be people who'll notice this and provide the requisite service. And well organized cities, they'll usually be those whose bodies are weakest and who aren't fit to do any other work. They'll stay around the market, exchanging money for the goods of those who have something to sell, and then exchanging those goods for the money of those who want them. Then, to fill this need, there will have to be retailers in our city, for aren't those who establish themselves in the marketplace to provide this service of buying and selling called retailers, while those who travel between cities are called merchants? That's right. There are other servants, I think, whose minds alone wouldn't qualify them for membership in our society, but whose bodies are strong enough for labor. These sell the use of their strength for a price called wage, and hence are themselves called wage earners. Isn't that so? Certainly. So wage earners complete our city? I think so. Well, Adamantus, has our city grown to completeness then? Perhaps it has. Then where are justice and injustice to be found in it? With which of the things we examined did they come in? I've no idea, Socrates, unless it was somewhere in some need that these people have of one another. You may be right, but we must look into it and not grow weary. First, then, let's see what sort of life our citizens will lead when they've been provided for in the way we've been describing. They'll produce bread, wine, clothes, and shoes, won't they? They'll build houses, work, work naked and barefoot in the summer, and wear adequate clothing and shoes in the winter. For food, they'll knead and cook the flour and meal they've made from wheat and barley. They'll put their honest cakes and loaves on reeds or clean leaves, and reclining on beds strewn with yew and myrtle, they'll feast with their children, drink their wine, and crowned with wreaths hymn with gods, hymn the gods. They'll enjoy sex with one another, but bear no more children than their resources allow, lest they fall into either poverty or war. It seems that you make your people feast without any delicacies, Glaucon interrupted. True enough. True enough, I said. I think my voice is getting tired at this point. True enough, I said. I was forgetting that they'll obviously need salt, olives, cheese, boiled roots, and vegetables of the sort they cook in the country. We'll give them desserts too, of course, consisting of figs, chickpeas, and beans, and they'll roast myrtle and acorns before the fire, drinking moderately, and so they'll live in peace and good health, and when they die at a ripe old age, they'll bequeath a similar life to their children. If you were founding a city for pigs, Socrates, he replied, wouldn't you fatten them on the same diet? Then how should I feed these people, Glaucon? I asked. In the conventional way. If they aren't to suffer hardship, they should recline on proper couches, dine at a table, and have the delicacies and desserts that people have nowadays. All right, I understand it. It isn't merely the origin of a city that we're considering, it seems, but the origin of a luxurious city. And that may not be a bad idea, for by examining it, we might very well see how justice and injustice grow up in cities. Yet the true city, in my opinion, is the one we've described, the healthy one, as it were. But let's study a city with a fever, if that's what you want. There's nothing to stop us. The things I mentioned earlier and the way of life I described won't satisfy some people, it seems, but couches, tables, and other furniture will have to be added, and of course, all sorts of delicacies, perfumed oils, incense, prostitutes, and pastries. We mustn't provide them only with the necessities we mentioned at first, such as houses, clothes, and shoes, but paintings and embroidery must be begun, and gold and ivory and like acquired. Isn't that so? Yes. And we'll take a pause there around line 373, section B, the start of section B. And yeah, we'll continue from there. Have a good day, everyone.